Now, before we get on to the main event, the Great Respect Debate itself, I have one final speaker to introduce, Bernard Salt. Many of you would know Bernard. He's a demographer and business advisor based in Melbourne, who's established an enviable reputation as a trend forecaster. Bernard is also a best-selling author of 3 popular books on demographic change and a columnist with the Australian and the Herald Sun newspapers. So it's my very great pleasure now to welcome Bernard to the stage. Please come.
Thanks very much, Nick, for that introduction. Bernard Salt, a partner with KPMG based in Melbourne. I am your adjudicator today, but I want to start the debate by looking at some trends in ageing, and particularly through the generations over the last 80 years or so. And I suppose I'm really looking at the challenges of ageing, the redefinition of old age. I think that's the key issue. And in order to do this, I've gone back 80 years to look at life expectancy in Australia in 1930. In 1930, the average Australian lived for 63 years. You qualified for the age pension at 65, so you promptly dropped dead 2 years before you got a pension back in 1930. The other issue about 1930 is that you were a child for 14 years and then you're an adult. The life form we now know as the teenager did not exist in 1930. Childhood, adulthood, old age and death. That's the way it worked 80 years ago, and you're an old person at 51 or 52. When you get back tonight, get out your family photograph albums, have a look at pictures of your parents, your grandparents, at the age of 50. They were old people. They looked old, they dressed old, they knew they had about 10 years to go. Let's kick it forward another 40 years to 1970, and life expectancy for the average Australian has kicked out to 71 years. That is 6 years in retirement that has to be planned for, provisioned for, either by the individual or by the state. And of course, that underpins an entire industry around financial planning, around retirement. The concept of a working life suddenly emerges. You start work at 15, you end work at 65, you have to have saved enough money to live for 6 years in retirement. It suddenly blossoms, or it wasn't an issue in terms of saving for retirement in our grandparents' age back in the 1930s, because you dropped dead in the workplace. There was no need to actually save for retirement. The other thing that has happened by 1970 is that the baby boomers have come along and they've invented a transition phase between childhood and adulthood, between 13 and 19. And you're now not an old person until well into your 60s. Let's kick that forward another 40 years to 2010. And life expectancy for the average Aussie is kicked out to 82 years. 83 for women and 79 for men. That is 17 years in retirement that has to be planned for, provision for, either by the individual or by the state. And that, of course, underpins the rise of a different attitude towards the later years in life. The average age of retirement for Australian is not 65, it's actually 58. That is 24 years in retirement. Statistically, if you make it through to 58, you've got more than 24 years, you've got about 27 years in retirement. Let's just say the last couple of years ain't so hot. You've got about 20 healthy, active years of life that has been gifted to this generation. What are you going to do with it? Sit at home and babysit the grandkids? Or is this generation of baby boomers, next decade and beyond, going to reach in and redefine, re-engineer what it is to be a 60-something or a 70-something or an 80-something over the next 20 years? This idea of a generation reaching in and grabbing a decade and re-engineering it has happened before. Gen X and Gen Y, over the last decade, have picked up the teenage phase in life invented by the baby boomers. They've picked it up and they've stretched it. I think you're now a teenager between the ages of 13 and 29. All of the measures of the transition into adulthood that baby boomers are making at 21, 22, 23, commitment to marriage, mortgage, children and a career, has been kicked out by Generation X and now by Generation Y to 28, 29 or 30. That changes the use of discretionary time and spending in the 20-something time in life. You don't need to be in a 3-bedroom brick veneer on the edge of town. You need to be in an inner-city apartment where you form, dismantle and reform relationships before you make your final selection, just on the right side of 30. It is a redefinition or a re-engineering of the 20-something time of life. I don't want to get married at 21. I want to get married at 28 or 29. It is possible for a generation in a single decade to reach in and re-engineer a space. Over the last decade, baby boomers have also picked up the teenage phase in life as a transition phase. They've picked it up and they've reinserted it into the 50-something time in life as a new teenage phase in life, as a transition phase. So the model now is that you peak in terms of your income earning capacity of late 40s and then you transition into retirement. Movements like sea change and tree change came out of left field over the last decade or so. Baby boomers invented the transition into adulthood 30 years, 40 years ago, and now they're inventing a transition into retirement. Sea change, tree change. A new concept coming out of America is the portfolio lifestyle stage in the life cycle. Work 2 days a week, play golf 1 day of the week, do some volunteering on another day of the week, do something with your wife, your spouse, invest in your relationship. It's a bit of this, it's a bit of that. It's simply a better business model than the 20th century notion of working to the age of 87 to 65, getting a gold watch and retiring. What we are now witnessing, I think, is a re-engineering of the space beyond 55 through to 75 and 80. And of course, if you end work at say 58, 59 or 60, and you've got another 25 years or so to go, you can't sit at home and pretend to be old. You're up there, out there, redefining that 60-something time in life. And I think that's precisely what the baby boomers will do over the next decade. This re-engineering of what it is to be 60-something, 70-something. Our idea of old age will shift. Never use the R word to a baby boomer. Baby boomers will never retire. Their parents retired, old people retire, obsolete people retire. Not the baby boomers, but they will see change or tree change. So the language we use to engage with people beyond the age of 60, beyond 70, beyond 80, I think will change. And this is driven by a fundamental shift in the demographics of Australia. In this chart I show you the number of people added to Australia over 100 years. This is 1950 on the left, 2050 on the right, and it shows you the number of people added to the 60-plus population, 60 to 79 to 80. And it's around about 25 to 50,000 people per year have been added to the 60-plus bucket in Australia, right throughout our lifetime. That's up to the year 2000. Here is the next 50 years in this target market we're talking about today. We're in a different space. We're on a different planet. There are 4.5 million baby boomers. The oldest one is 64, the youngest one's 48. 4.5 million of them sitting right on the cusp of retirement. And they are about to jump into the space now occupied by 2.5 million people. 4.5 into 2.5. So there's a volume shift. There is an attitudinal shift also. The people that are retired at the moment are a little generation. That generation that come from the Great Depression, from before the Second World War. They value bizarre concepts like sacrifice, going without, not the baby boomers. It's a very consumerist generation, a me generation, the first generation of educated, articulate and opinionated people in retirement. Very difficult people to deal with in retirement. Not just in volume, but also in their expectations. My argument is that if over the last decade we can re-engineer what it is to live your 20s, instead of being out in the burbs or in the city, forming, dismantling, reforming relationships, going on gap years, trialling this relationship, working overseas. If we can re-engineer the 20-somethings over the last decade, why would we not re-engineer the 60-somethings and the 70-somethings over the next 20 years? And leading the way, of course, will be the baby boomers. So a rethinking of the way in which we engage with the 60-plus population in Australia. Thank you very much.
You know, I could listen to this man all day. I could just listen to that over and over again because, you know, dry figures suddenly come alive. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Ed.
Okay. Just got a little bit of housekeeping to do just before we go. I know you're all on tentative going to perform? Oh yes, he's got to give the rules. I mentioned housekeeping, and this is housekeeping plus, because there are rules, and you can see whether they get off track with it. Thanks.
Thanks, Pete. As the official adjudicator to today's debate, I have two main roles: to decide which team has won the debate, and to provide an explanation as to the reasons for the decision. I've also been asked to read out the rules for the debate today. So, as you know, our two teams are debating the topic, Seniors Must Earn Respect. Our senior Victorian team will debate the affirmative. They will be arguing that, yes, seniors do need to earn respect. Our young Victorian team will debate the negative. They will be debating no. Seniors should automatically receive respect. The rules for our debaters are as follows. Each debater has 5 minutes to speak. At 4 minutes, a bell will ring to indicate our speakers have 1 minute to go. At 5 minutes, the bell will ring again and our debater must stop soon or very shortly after the bell has rung. General rules for debaters that they need to keep in mind. Debaters must remember to focus on the arguments that their opposing debaters present so that they can rebut appropriately. No personal or discriminatory comments are to be made at any time. Jokes and humour are allowed and welcome, and debaters are not to speak, make comment or try to interrupt another debater while they are speaking. So that's the rules. As per formal debating formats, the affirmative team speaks first, so that's our senior Victorian team today, starting with Dr. Peter Hollingworth, the first speaker on the affirmative team. And I wish both teams good luck. Thank you.
Thanks, Bernard. Well, now, Bernard, if you'll notice, is going up there in the heavens near the organ, very godlike. And it's my pleasure to invite Amit Golder from the Benetas Association of Victoria to join Bernard. Please make Amit welcome as he makes his way up there as well. Every night. Now, the Benetas Association has kindly provided their support to today's event, and we thank them for it. And Amit has given up his time to be here today to support Bernard in his official adjudicator role. Amit will be the one keeping us and our debaters on time today, so he'll be ringing the bell.